Well, I think that what Eisenhower in his first draft warned about was a military-industrial intelligence complex, and that's what we live under. Penn Jones, one of the earliest researchers, used to say in his Texas drawl, he said, "We have been in the death grip of the military-industrial complex since November 22nd, 1963. And he'd pause for a second, he'd say, "Now let's all pray I'm wrong." But I don't think he was wrong. I think we have been, and I think we've been in a permanent war economy, which is what happens in the last stages of monopoly capital. Because you have to expand markets and you have to grab resources, so you go into permanent war. Permanent war also gives you a fake economy that's dependent on producing weapons, and it's not job efficient, but and then you fill your coffers from the gains that you get out of the war, and you also use it as a way to become extra constitutional. Even the early founders, Madison and the others, knew the war was the worst enemy of democracy, that it aggrandized the power of the executive, it opened up the congressional purse, it allowed all sorts of excesses, and it curbed dissent. And Goebbels said that it's not hard to have a war. All you have to do is scare the populace and demonize the pacifists and the anti-war people, and you can march the country into war. Well, I mean, we've lived under first the Cold War lie and all that propaganda that we were in danger from communist takeover. Then they went to, about the 1980s, terrorism and counterterrorism as the motif, and that's basically what we're existing in now. But when you have somebody like Cheney after 9/11 saying we're going to go in as many as 60 countries and a war that will end in your lifetime, you better listen up. It doesn't mean you have to put up with it, but you better understand that these guys plan ahead. My mother planned draft call, accurate within 100 people either way, the annual call for the draft 5 years in advance. Wow. And you had tables from the Joint Chiefs of how many people would die, attrition levels, death levels if they were at war, how many retire, how many re-up, how many enlist anew, how many discharge under each category, therefore how many did you have to draft. Even the draft figure that she came up with, the accurate one, had to be multiplied by 5 because the selective service system would flunk 50 to 55% at a physical, 10 to 15% would get a deferment or exemption, another 10 to 15% wouldn't show, and then they were back to the 20% they needed. So they even built in the resistance in their planning, and they were planning 5 years ahead that accurately. And she told me, when I asked her after she retired, when did they tell you they would escalate the war in Vietnam? She said that in April of '63, under Kennedy's orders, she changed her projections for the first time in a 30-year career. She was ordered to change her projections in Vietnam and to project a full withdrawal of all American troops by the end of 1964. And I said, well, when did they reverse that? When did they start to escalate? She said, late November. I said, the last week in November? Something happens on November 22nd, yeah. Right. And she said, yes, the Monday following the assassination. So this is Kennedy barely in the grave. My mother comes into work, and the Joint Chiefs and the Planning and Direction Office of Projected for Wars tell her to project a 10-year war with 57,000 American dead. She couldn't believe the figures. She went back up to the Joint Chiefs. She'd never done that before, and she said, these can't be right. And they said, no, those are the figures, and you'll use them. And they know where they're going. We don't, but they know. And they know how long it will take and what it'll cost in human terms and also in money terms. And they run the purse, and they determine the direction of the society. And they've spent $8 trillion since 9/11, which was at worst a black eye. It was a terrible incident, but it hardly brought the country to its knees or put us under a war situation. They spent $8 trillion on defense increases, intelligence increases, and homeland security. And they plan to spend much more. Right. Why you have an economy, or trouble in the economy in this country? I wanted to get a bumper sticker. It's the Pentagon, stupid. You know, you can't spend this kind of money. And plus, it's to no result, because they will never. You can't build a society that's impervious to every possible attack. You'll go broke and you'll go crazy. And you can't bomb everybody and kill everybody, even though they like to, most of them. But if you're not going to go back and address why there is asymmetrical warfare and terrorism, as they call it, coming out of these societies, if you're not going to ever address that, then you're just going to escalate it. And even Rumsfeld admitted that they didn't know whether they were creating more enemies than they were killing. Well, that's right. You are creating more enemies. If you just meet violence with violence, that's what you get. There were attacks in France in the last decade from the sons and daughters of the Algerian freedom fighters who had been slaughtered by the French military years before with brutal methods. And so you just create a generational black hole of violence that's going to perpetuate itself. And unless you're going to restore justice and restore hope in these societies that have gotten so desperate and they see no end, that they're going to sanction and support violence to get their way out of it because they don't see any other option. If you give them another option, then that's going to undermine that route. But if you do tit for tat, like Israel, Palestine, that situation, it just keeps going. And you don't need to spend trillions of dollars to do those things. You can you know, with a small fraction of what we spend every minute, you could make a lot of the world comfortable and feed them and clothe them and take care of their justice needs. And you know, but that's not what it's about. It's about a small group of people at the top, supported by and protected by this military-industrial complex, who are hoarding the surplus of the world and hoarding the resources of the world and monopolizing access to them to the point that almost all of us now are disenfranchised in that model, and they don't care whether we survive or not. We have to care about it.